To your knowledge, did your father have any enemies? Anyone that knows this story is probably shouting yes right now and wondering why they aren't arresting her yet. This is 2018's Lizzie, and we're about to get a modern look at a classic tale of how Lizzie Borden killed her family. Spoiler alert, while I might be giving you my opinion on the film, links to the film are in the description for those that want to watch it on their own time. Lizzie sits through a painfully direct questioning session, but after she hears that question we flash to 6 months prior. Here we meet Bridget, who is making her way through town. Eventually she comes to the board and house, and she comes inside to announce that she is the new housemaid. When she meets Abby Borden, Abby takes her for a tour through the house and she tells her what her duties will be. When they get to Bridget's room, it's actually quite spacious, and Bridget starts to settle in, at least until Lizzie comes in. Lizzie apologizes for barging in, but she introduces herself and becomes quite friendly with her. Later that evening, Lizzie is dressed to go out, but her father Andrew is quite against her leaving the house unaccompanied. Either way, Lizzie is not about to sit there and listen to her father droll on. Eventually, Andrew gives her a midnight curfew and Lizzie goes on her way. It's weird to think of Lizzie Borden as anything other than an axe-wielding murderess. Seeing her socialize amongst regular people kind of throws a wrench into the system. When Lizzie goes to the theater, she's nitpicked at in the lavatory by one of the local women, but she brushes it off and makes sure to respect her family name. While Lizzie enjoys the opera, things take a quick turn. Yeah, I didn't see that coming either. The amount of real-life issues in comparison to axe-wielding moments is surprising, but it's nice to get a story to explain the legend. After Lizzie is brought home, she wakes up to find her sister Emma looking over her. When Emma tells her that everything will be fine, Lizzie doesn't believe a word she says. Meanwhile, downstairs, Bridget brings back Lizzie's food tray with all the food intact, and Abby simply sighs and goes on to clean the dishes with her. Bridget spots Lizzie going out to the shed in the backyard, and we see that Lizzie goes there to talk to the pigeons and read her books in privacy. Bridget comes in to gather firewood, and Lizzie seems happy to see her. When she asks if Bridget has had any schooling, Bridget tells her that she has had some, but it isn't her strong suit. Some days later, Lizzie is taking time to teach Bridget how to read, and she seems to be making great strides considering her lack of education in comparison. During their session, Lizzie seems to sense a fit coming on, but she pushes it down and continues. That evening, Andrew receives a letter that says no one will save him from what is to come. Does someone from back then already know how this story ends? I feel like getting an ominous letter like that back then would be the same as getting your own death certificate hand delivered to you. What does he do after reading this note? Go hit on Bridget. Of course, he even offers her a small raise. Then he shows up in her room as she's sleeping, brushes her arm, and tells her to be a sweet girl. We don't get confirmation that he does anything else, but I'd find it odd if he went up to the attic bedroom to rub her shoulder then go back to bed. The next day, Bridget is in the shed crying, and Lizzie makes her way out there. After asking if Bridget is hiding, she gives her one of her favorite books, and she hopes that she has been able to console her somehow. When Lizzie go to leave the house later, she finds another handwritten note at the doorstep that speaks of someone's sins. She looks around for who left the note, but no one stands out to her. That night, an aggressive knock comes from the door, and Andrew goes to investigate with his revolver. When Andrew goes outside, Emma and Lizzie gather in the parlor, and Bridget watches from her window. Andrew calls out for whoever it is to show themselves, but when no answer comes, he goes back inside. Then we just cut to morning, like everyone just went back to bed. After that, when Lizzie asks about telling the constable the next morning, Andrew just brushes it off like nothing happened at all. Lizzie mentions that the land they reclaimed recently might have aggravated some of the town's people, but Andrew simply blames her for making the family name vulnerable. Lizzie goes to pray at the church, and when she comes back, she finds that her Uncle John has arrived to speak business with Andrew. When Andrew shows John the letters, he explains that he wants to set his affairs in order, and he speaks of John taking care of the girls as his finances and well-being if something is to happen to him. Lizzie eavesdrops the entire conversation, and she even hears how her own health is failing. Andrew even mentions that the doctors think she should be institutionalized. When Andrew goes to talk to her later, he gives her a locket with her birth mother's picture in it. Andrew explains that he wants them to make a new beginning, and Lizzie assures him that she wants the same. I'm not sure this is what Andrew had in mind when he said he wanted a new beginning. Lizzie stages a robbery, and when the police show up to question everyone, Andrew barges in and mentions that the pawn store owner already told him what happened. If you're gonna stage a robbery and sell family valuables, cover your tracks as punishment for Lizzie's wrongdoings. Andrew takes an axe and goes to the shed where he beheads every pigeon of Lizzie's that night at dinner. No one seems comfortable being around everyone, but Andrew encourages Lizzie to eat. What makes it a little cool is the fact that he cooked her pigeons for dinner. When Lizzie speaks her mind to Andrew, he slaps her before she retreats to her bedroom. After she locks all of the doors, she ends up having another fit that ends up knocking her out. When she hears Emma explaining that they will take her away, and Lizzie explains that she had a spell. Later, Lizzie goes to the family attorney and she questions whether her inheritance has been put at risk. When she finds out that her inheritance has been signed over to her Uncle John, she's none too happy with the decision. Later, another letter arrives, but this one is for Bridget, and she's just found out that her mother has died from illness. How much bad stuff can really be jam-packed in this movie? We've got a woman rape, pigeon beheading, death threats, and wouldn't you know, when Andrew goes to express sympathy to Bridget about her dead mother, he makes another pass in her. Just get rid of this family. That night, Lizzie is woken up by the sounds of someone else walking the halls. She follows the sounds to Lizzie's room, where she finds her father is already in there with her. Lizzie rushes back to her room, appalled by what she has just found out, and she breaks a mirror and scatters the glass outside Rachel's door. When Lizzie hears Andrew cry out in pain, she has her confirmation. The next morning, Lizzie finds it hard to find words to say to Bridget, but Bridget assures her that it isn't as easy as leaving and starting over. When the two of them meet up in the shed, Lizzie apologizes for everything that is happening to Bridget, and she assures Bridget that she's ashamed to be Andrew's daughter. Afterwards, Bridget and Lizzie continue to pass notes back and forth to one another, and their relationship becomes a little more personal than either one of them had originally intended. Yet another thing that I hadn't expected in a Lizzie Borden movie. Romance. Of course it's with the maid, though that feels a bit cliche, but it fits in nicely if she needs an alibi or something. Then one day Lizzie spots the man that has been leaving the notes on their door. Go figure. Now I'm sure that no one would believe her, but hopefully she goes about this the right way. Well, we know how the story ends, but hopefully it goes as smoothly as possible. First, Lizzie takes the evidence to Emma, who tells her to be careful with this information, but Lizzie ends up addressing Uncle John directly. John is no pushover though, and he makes it very clear that he's not scared of her accusations as he pushes himself on Lizzie. Bridget comes around the corner and intervenes just in time. The next morning, Lizzie goes to visit Bridget, and she assures Lizzie that she won't have to worry about John seeing how he left early that morning. Lizzie thanks Bridget for stepping in the night before, and the two of them find comfort in each other for a moment. Later, Andrew comes home to surprise Abby, and he looks for Bridget. It's here that Abby finally faces Andrew and tells him that she's astonished at how many ways he can embarrass the family. Meanwhile, Lizzie and Bridget are getting it on in the shed out back. They pass notes back and forth to avoid getting caught, even though they are in the same house. But it's okay to get freaky in the shed that everyone knows they hide in. What sense does that make? They should have just gone to Bridget's room and put broken glass outside the door. Again, home alone, that house, but no. So who shows up and spots the two of them? Oh, pervert McGee. That night, when Bridget goes to her room, she is grabbed by Andrew, who is none too happy with what he saw. The next day, Andrew confronts Lizzie about her relationship with Bridget, and he informs her that he'll be firing Bridget in due course. He will forgive you. I feel like Abby is just jealous that she's the only one that hasn't connected with Bridget. In all fairness, I feel like she's been fairly nice to Lizzie up until now. Now she's lost her husband and stepdaughter to the help. That night, Lizzie assures Bridget that there is a way around all this, and she goes to her father's study to gather Andrew's will. After she burns it, she goes to her room to be alone with her thoughts, and as the music box plays eerily, we see the axe in the basement. The next morning, bodies are found all over the house, and it's clear that someone has chopped up the family with the axe. Lizzie screams and calls for Bridget, and she tells her to call the police. Once the police arrive, they take pictures of the crime scene, and Lizzie goes to answer the questions. After the funeral, John swears that there is a will, but no one can seem to find it. Now Emma assures him that they have tried to find one, but it is simply nowhere to be found. When Emma sits down with the police, she finds out that they want to charge Lizzie, and they assume that she did it to inherit the small fortune they stand to get. Emma tries to explain that Lizzie will not plead guilty. Well, I'd say there's a clear option here. Time to tell Lizzie to suck it up and take the plea deal. There are really no other options unless you really want to just die. That night, Lizzie tries to get Bridget to look at her, but she can't bear to. Soon men come to take Lizzie away, and she's escorted to a women's prison. Prison back then looks terrifying, like it's one bad rock slide away from becoming a tomb. I do everything in my power to stay as far away as possible from that place. Soon Lizzie comes to stand trial, and We find out that the trial has been closed to the public since Lizzie is of a good family. After questioning a chemist, they find out that most of the hair and blood on the hatchet was indeed from an animal instead of human. Back at the house, John is seen searching through the entire office for a trace of the will. Meanwhile, Bridget packs up and decides to find other work before the end of the trial. Emma tries to threaten her into admitting to the crime, but her threats don't seem to work on Bridget. Back at the prison, John goes to visit Lizzie. He explains that he understands the law and the fact that Abby died first ensures that Abby's family doesn't have access to any of the estate. Lizzie shows that she can't be pushed around and she holds all the cards when it comes to the family estate. It's a little harder to scare a woman on death row. What have they got to lose? Some of their dignity. That's not worth worrying about at this point. The next day, the court brings Bridget to the stand for questioning and they ask her whereabouts during the murders. After her alibi checks out, they ask her about Lizzie's whereabouts and she explains that she was outside the entire time too. She ends up getting grilled about whether Lizzie ever left her sight, but she continuously reassures the court that Lizzie never left her sight. That morning, after Lizzie goes back to her cell, Bridget goes to visit and she asks what she really was to Lizzie. Lizzie can't believe that she's asking that of all things, but she tries to assure Bridget that she really does care about her. Bridget tries to make her understand that they could never happen, though. When they flash back to the morning of the murders, we see that Lizzie makes her way around the premises, hastily preparing. As Bridget goes about her duties outside, she gives Abby a note that causes her to go to her room to get changed. Once there, Lizzie is waiting in the nude with an ex. That would scare the crap out of me too. I think if a killer was waiting around the corner with an ex, seeing them pop up naked would just scare and confuse me even more. After Lizzie is done with Abby, she heads downstairs to take a scrub bath in a bucket and she washes the axe. While she's there too, she goes back upstairs to get dressed and soon Andrew is at the door waiting to come in. Bridget lets him inside and soon Lizzie comes down to join Andrew in his reading room. Lizzie brings him a glass of water and kisses him on the forehead before leaving him to his reading. Lizzie goes outside to pick some pears and this plays right along with what she said her alibi was. While she's outside, Bridget heads into the basement to take off her clothes and get the axe. When she comes back in to confront Andrew, she gets his attention before raising the axe. Andrew tries to convince her to lower the axe and she almost does. Then Lizzie appears, takes the axe from Bridget and murders her father. Lizzie literally looks like a pro here, like a colonial hitman. Pilgrims Gone Wild. Even after all the caution she took for her own kill, the second she realized that Bridget couldn't stomach it, she simply snatches the axe and finishes the job. This is her father and she just chops him. After another rigorous cleaning session, Lizzie kills some pigeons so animal blood is crusted on the eggs and she stages the murders a little better before alerting everyone with her scream. Back in the present day, Bridget tells Lizzie not to come looking for her and she leaves Lizzie there in her cell. As Bridget rides a train out of town, she remembers all the fond memories she and Lizzie had shared before all the madness took over. Then we get a quick little story on what happened to everyone. Apparently Lizzie was let off because they didn't think a woman of her standing could do it. Her and Emma never talked after a fight they had and Bridget moved to Montana. Lizzie ended up dying alone and left her money to a humane society. I'll be the first to admit that I never knew any of the stuff that happened after the trial. For all I knew, Lizzie died right after getting off, but now I know. Well, I love a good Lizzie Borden axe chopping horror movie. It was kind of cool to get an actual story behind the storytelling. It's definitely worth a shot and it's great for all the crime thriller junkies out there. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next and I'll see you in the next video.